Chapter 1. The Inheritance and the Unease. The silence in the house was a heavy shroud, muffling even the distant hum of the city. Alara, 32, traced the condensation on her teacup, the chill seeping into her fingertips a mirror of the cold knot in her stomach. 6 months. 6 months since the world had tilted on its axis. Since the vibrant laughter that once filled these rooms had been replaced by an echoing void. Her mother, gone. A sudden, brutal illness that had ripped through their lives like a wildfire, leaving only ash and an unbearable quiet. She had moved into this isolated Victorian house on the outskirts of town seeking solace. A place where her grief could unfurl without the judging eyes of well-meaning friends or the pitying glances of strangers. The house was old, its bones creaking with stories she didn't yet know, its vastness a stark contrast to the cozy, familiar home she'd shared with her mother. Every empty room was a testament to what she'd lost. Every silent corner a reminder of the conversations that would never be had again. This self-imposed exile was meant to be a balm, a quiet space for healing, but it often felt more like a tomb. The doorbell, a jarring chime in the oppressive quiet, startled her. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she saw the silhouettes of 2 burly men struggling with a large, oddly shaped object. A delivery. Her brow furrowed in confusion. She hadn't ordered anything. Opening the door, she was met with the scent of old wood and dust. Alara Vance? One of the men grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. Delivery for you. From the estate of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, her great-aunt, a distant relative she barely remembered, who had passed away a few weeks prior. Alara had received a formal letter from a solicitor, a dry, impersonal missive about a small inheritance, but no details. She had assumed it was a monetary sum, something to help with the mounting bills of her mother's illness and funeral. Not ... this. They wheeled in an antique rocking chair. It was a magnificent piece, carved from dark, polished wood, with intricate floral patterns etched into its arms and back. The seat was upholstered in a faded, deep crimson velvet, worn smooth in places from years of use. It was beautiful in a somber, almost melancholic way. But as it crossed the threshold, a shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down Alara's spine. It wasn't the chill of the autumn air. It was something else, something that prickled at the edges of her awareness. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, a lingering draft, or simply the morbid association with a deceased relative. Her grief, she reasoned, was making her overly sensitive. They placed the chair in the living room, near the large bay window that overlooked a sprawling, overgrown garden. It looked out of place, a relic from another time in her modern, minimalist space. The delivery men left, their heavy footsteps fading, leaving Alara alone with the rocking chair and a renewed silence. She approached it cautiously, running a hand over the smooth, cool wood. It felt heavy, not just in weight, but with an unseen presence. She shook her head, a small, humorless laugh escaping her lips. Grief was a strange beast, capable of conjuring ghosts from shadows. That night, The house settled around her, its old timbers groaning in the wind. Elara lay in bed, sleep a distant, elusive friend. The silence was broken by a faint, rhythmic creak. Creak, creak. It was coming from the living room. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She told herself it was the house, settling, contracting in the cool night air. Old houses made noises, but the creaking was too regular, too deliberate. It sounded like a rocking chair. Her rocking chair. She crept out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The moonlight, pale and ethereal, streamed through the living room window, casting long dancing shadows. And there it was. The rocking chair, swaying gently, back and forth, back and forth. Empty. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She stood there for a long moment, watching it, her breath catching in her throat. Then, with a sudden, violent lurch, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the creaking. She told herself it was the wind, a draft, anything but what her terrified mind was screaming. She backed away slowly, retreating to her bedroom, pulling the covers over her head like a child, trying to banish the image of the empty, swaying chair from her mind. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already beginning to sprout, its tendrils wrapping around her fragile sanity. For the next few days, the subtle movements continued. A gentle sway when she entered the room, a faint creak from the corner of her eye. She tried to ignore it, to rationalize it away. It was an old chair, probably unbalanced. The house was old, prone to drafts. Her mind was playing tricks on her, a side effect of her profound grief. She even tried moving the chair, dragging it to a different part of the room, but the subtle, unsettling movements persisted. Each time, a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach, but she fought it, clinging to the last vestiges of her rational mind. Then came the night the whispers started. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, just at the edge of her hearing. She would pause, strain her ears, but they would vanish, leaving her to wonder if she had imagined them. Until one night, she woke abruptly, a cold sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. The rocking chair was rocking violently, a frantic, desperate rhythm that filled the silent house. And from it, a chilling, guttural whisper, raw and ancient, seemed to emanate. It wasn't a language she understood, but a single word, sharp and clear, cut through the gibberish, a name that wasn't hers, but sounded eerily familiar, like a forgotten echo from a nightmare. The sound was so visceral, so undeniably real, that it shattered her carefully constructed walls of denial. This wasn't grief. This wasn't imagination. This was something else. Something terrifying. She scrambled out of bed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and fled the room, leaving the rocking chair to its violent, unseen dance, the whispered name still ringing in her ears, a chilling prelude to the horror that had just begun. Chapter 2. Escalation and Doubt. The chilling whisper from the rocking chair had shattered Elara's fragile peace. The rationalizations she'd clung to, the comforting lies she'd told herself about grief and imagination, crumbled in the face of such undeniable malevolence. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Each night, a terrifying vigil against the unseen. The creaking of the chair, once subtle, now echoed through the house with an almost deliberate rhythm. A mocking lullaby that stole her sanity one tick-tock at a time. Objects began to shift. A framed photograph of her mother, once perched securely on the mantelpiece, was found face down on the rug, its glass cracked. A stack of books on the coffee table would be inexplicably scattered across the floor. These were not the random occurrences of an old house. They were targeted, unsettling acts. Alara started documenting them, a desperate attempt to prove to herself, and to anyone who would listen, that she wasn't losing her mind. She set up her phone to record, positioning it to capture the rocking chair. But the footage was always inconclusive. A blur, a sudden burst of static, or most frustratingly, nothing at all. The chair would remain perfectly still when the camera was rolling, only to resume its unsettling dance the moment she turned her back. Her isolation, once a chosen sanctuary, now felt like a suffocating trap. The silence of the house, once a comfort, was now a canvas for the phantom whispers and the incessant creaking. Desperate for a tether to reality, she called Sarah, her oldest friend, a pragmatic, no-nonsense woman who had always been her anchor. Alara recounted the escalating events, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and shame. Sarah listened patiently, her responses measured, kind, but ultimately dismissive. Alara, honey, I know you're going through a lot. Grief can play tricks on the mind. Maybe you need to get out more. See a doctor about your sleep. The words, though well-intentioned, felt like a fresh wound, reinforcing Alara's growing fear that she was truly alone in this, that her sanity was indeed unraveling. The dismissal from Sarah only intensified Alara's self-doubt. Was she truly projecting her grief onto an inanimate object? Was the trauma of her mother's death manifesting in such a terrifying way? The whispers, when they came, seemed to echo her own anxieties, twisting her deepest fears into insidious suggestions. Alone, always alone. You caused this? She'd clutch her head, trying to shake off the insidious thoughts, but they clung to her like a shroud. Then came the incident with Whiskers. Alara's beloved tabby cat, a constant source of comfort and purring companionship, had always been wary of the rocking chair, his fur bristling whenever he came too close. One morning, Alara found him stiff and cold, curled up at the base of the rocking chair. There were no visible injuries, no signs of struggle, just a peaceful, yet profoundly unsettling stillness. A wave of icy dread washed over Alara. This wasn't her imagination. This wasn't grief. This was real. The chair had claimed her last innocent comfort. Sarah, concerned by Alara's increasingly frantic calls, decided to visit. She arrived with a casserole and a forced cheerfulness, determined to pull Alara out of her funk. Alara, desperate for validation, tried to explain, to show her the subtle signs, the cold spots, the lingering scent of decay that only she seemed to detect. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, offered logical explanations for everything, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Alara's rising hysteria. As Sarah stood near the rocking chair, attempting to dust it, a sudden invisible force slammed into her, sending her sprawling across the polished floor. A vase on a nearby table toppled, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Sarah gasped, her face pale with shock, but quickly recovered, attributing it to a dizzy spell, a loose rug, anything but the truth that Elara desperately needed her to see. This house is old, Elara. You're not sleeping. You're seeing things. Sarah's voice, though shaken, held firm to her rational explanation. Elara watched her friend, a profound sense of despair settling over her. Even when confronted with undeniable proof, Sarah refused to believe. The incident, instead of validating Elara's fears, only served to deepen her isolation, cementing the terrifying notion that she was truly alone in this escalating nightmare, her sanity hanging by a thread, unraveling with each creak of the rocking chair. Chapter 3: The Investigation and the Past. Sarah's skepticism, coupled with the chilling demise of Whiskers, solidified Elara's resolve. The rational world had failed her. It was time to delve into the irrational. Her grief, once a paralyzing force, now fueled a desperate need for answers. She would uncover the truth behind the rocking chair, even if it meant confronting a reality far more terrifying than she could imagine. Her investigation began with the deceased relative, Eleanor Vance. Elara remembered little of her, a vague impression of a reclusive, eccentric woman who lived in a sprawling, dusty house filled with forgotten relics. The solicitor's office provided the first tangible clues. A faded photograph of Eleanor, surprisingly young and vibrant, seated in a rocking chair that was undeniably the rocking chair. Accompanying the photo was a small leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, filled with Eleanor's elegant, looping script. The journal, the solicitor explained, was found tucked away in a secret compartment within the chair itself, a detail that sent a fresh wave of unease through Elara. Eleanor's early entries were mundane, chronicling daily life. But as Elara delved deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. Eleanor, too, had experienced subtle, then escalating phenomena around the chair. Whispers, cold spots, objects moving on their own. Her family, much like Sarah, had dismissed her concerns, attributing them to her delicate constitution or an overactive imagination. Elara felt a profound, chilling kinship with this forgotten relative, a shared burden of unseen terror and isolating disbelief. Then came the entries that made Elara's blood run cold. Eleanor's accounts grew more frantic, detailing violent rocking, guttural whispers, and terrifying apparitions. She wrote of a malevolent presence, a shadow that feeds on sorrow, and a desperate search for a way to appease or banish it. One entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, read, "It demands a price. It demands a life. Do not let it claim another." Elara's research extended beyond the journal. She visited the local historical society, poring over dusty archives and microfiche. She found old newspaper clippings, their headlines screaming of tragedy. One, in particular, caught her eye. Mysterious death of local child. Accidental fall ruled. The article detailed the death of a young girl, Lily May, who had fallen from a second-story window in Eleanor's house decades ago. The date of the incident coincided with a period of intense, almost feverish, entries in Eleanor's journal, entries that spoke of a desperate struggle, of trying to protect someone, of a profound failure. The article mentioned that Lily May was often found playing near an antique rocking chair in the living room. The official ruling was accidental, but the undertones of suspicion, the hushed rumors of Eleanor's eccentricity, were palpable. As Alara read, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The inscription she'd found on the chair, which she'd initially dismissed as cryptic, was not a warning from a previous victim, but a desperate plea from Eleanor herself. It was a coded message, a desperate attempt to communicate the chair's malevolent influence, a warning to whoever might inherit it next. The name whispered by the chair in Chapter 1, the name that wasn't hers, but sounded eerily familiar, echoed in her mind. Lily May. The chair wasn't just haunted. It was a living, sentient entity, feeding on grief and trauma, and it had been subtly manipulating Eleanor, and now Alara, for years. The deceased relative hadn't just left her an inheritance. She had passed on a curse, a terrifying legacy of sorrow and fear. Eleanor, in her final act, had tried to warn her, but Alara, blinded by her own grief, had walked straight into the trap. The true horror wasn't just the ghost in the rocking chair. It was the chilling realization that she was now inextricably bound to its dark, insatiable hunger. Chapter 4. The Presence and the Personal Connection. The revelation of Lily May and Eleanor's desperate warnings had shifted Alara's fear from a nebulous dread to a sharp, focused terror. The rocking chair was no longer just a haunted object. It was a predator, and Alara, its chosen prey. The subtle movements and whispers of the previous weeks now seemed like mere preludes to the true horror that was about to unfold. The haunting became overtly aggressive, a direct assault on Alara's senses and her physical space. The rocking chair, once swaying gently, now thrashed violently, its rhythmic creaks replaced by splintering groans that echoed through the house. Objects weren't just shifting. They were thrown with malicious intent. A heavy ceramic vase shattered against the wall, narrowly missing Alara's head. Books flew from shelves, their pages fluttering like terrified birds. The cold spots intensified, becoming pockets of Arctic air that clung to her, raising goosebumps and stealing her breath. Faint whispers transformed into guttural snarls, often calling her name, or more chillingly, Lily May's, intertwining their fates in a macabre dance. Alara experienced physical manifestations that left undeniable marks. Waking in the morning, she'd find angry red scratches on her arms and legs, as if invisible claws had raked her skin during the night. The feeling of being watched was constant, a suffocating presence that followed her from room to room. She'd catch fleeting apparitions in her peripheral vision. A child-sized shadow darting across the hallway, a gaunt, elderly woman standing silently in the corner of her bedroom, only to vanish when she turned to face them. These weren't the vague, easily dismissed shadows of her grief. They were sharp, distinct, and terrifyingly real. The entity seemed to feed on her emotions, particularly her fear and grief. The more terrified she became, the more violent the manifestations. The more she mourned her mother, the more the whispers intensified, twisting her sorrow into a grotesque parody. It was as if the chair, or whatever malevolence resided within it, was deliberately trying to break her, to push her over the edge of sanity. One evening, as Alara sat huddled in the living room, a blanket wrapped tightly around her, the rocking chair began to rock with a slow, deliberate rhythm. From its empty seat, a faint, translucent form began to coalesce. It was Lily May, but not the innocent child from the old photograph. Her eyes were hollow, her small mouth contorted into a silent scream, and her tiny hands, skeletal and claw-like, reached out towards Alara. As the apparition solidified, it began to whisper, its voice a chilling echo of Ilara's own mother's voice, but laced with venom. "You killed her, you let her go, you're next." The accusations, mirroring Ilara's deepest, unspoken guilt about her mother's death, pierced her heart like daggers. The physical manifestations intensified. Her reflection in the antique mirror across the room flickered, showing not Alara's terrified face, but a decaying skeletal visage, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. She blinked, and it was gone, replaced by her own horrified reflection, but the image was seared into her mind. It was then that the horrifying truth solidified in Ilara's mind. The entity wasn't just tied to the chair, or to Lily May, or even to Eleanor. It was tied to a specific unresolved aspect of her own past grief. The ghost wasn't just haunting the chair. It was haunting her, specifically targeting her vulnerabilities, her guilt, her deepest fears. The rocking chair was not merely a conduit for the haunting, but a living, sentient entity itself, feeding on grief and trauma. It had been subtly manipulating Alara, and perhaps even her deceased relative, for years, drawing them into its orbit. It had orchestrated the inheritance, the move to the isolated house, the very circumstances that had made Alara so vulnerable. The ghost was a manifestation of her own guilt, a representation of the person she lost, twisted into something malevolent by the chair's insidious influence. The line between external haunting and internal psychological torment had not just blurred. It had dissolved completely. Alara was not just being haunted. She was being consumed, her mind becoming the battleground for a terror that was both deeply personal and terrifyingly real. Chapter 5: The Descent and the Revelation. Ilara's world had shrunk to the confines of the house. A gilded cage with a rocking chair reigned supreme. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a constant, gnawing paranoia. Every shadow held a lurking threat, every creak of the old house a whispered accusation. Her once sharp mind, now a fractured kaleidoscope of fear and exhaustion, struggled to distinguish between reality and the vivid, horrifying hallucinations that plagued her waking hours. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a prison, and the rocking chair, a terrifying focal point, its rhythmic sway a constant reminder of her torment. She tried to fight back, a desperate, futile attempt to reclaim her sanity. She tried to destroy the chair, hacking at its ornate carvings with a kitchen knife, but the blade seemed to glance off the wood leaving no mark. The chair vibrated with a malevolent energy, its rocking intensifying with each frustrated blow, as if mocking her efforts. The haunting, far from diminishing, intensified, the entity's presence growing stronger, more oppressive, feeding on her despair. Her attempts to seek help were met with blank stares and hushed tones. Her few remaining friends, worn down by her increasingly erratic behavior, had distanced themselves. She was truly alone, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, or so her mind, twisted by the chair's influence, constantly whispered. The revelation came during a night of unparalleled terror. Elara, driven to the brink of madness, found herself physically trapped by the entity. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on her, suffocating her. The room spun, the walls seemed to breathe, and the rocking chair, now a monstrous, pulsating silhouette in the gloom, loomed over her. She was forced to relive a distorted, horrifying version of the past tragedy connected to the chair. Visions flashed before her eyes. A child, Lily May, her small body racked with silent sobs, being rocked in the chair, her face pale and drawn. But the scene twisted, contorted into something grotesque. The child wasn't just crying. She was being drained, her life force slowly siphoned away by the chair, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. Then the vision shifted. A family member, not Eleanor, but someone else. Someone Elara vaguely recognized from old family photos, sat in the chair, their face contorted in a mask of cold indifference as they watched Lily May's life ebb away. It was a heinous act, a betrayal, and the rocking chair was not just a witness, but an active participant, its rhythmic sway a silent accomplice. As the horrifying vision reached its crescendo, the ghost of Eleanor Vance appeared, not as the victim Elara had imagined, but as a malevolent guardian of the chair's dark secret. Her eyes, once filled with a desperate warning, now burned with a chilling, possessive fire. "You are next, Elara. The chair demands its due. Your grief, it is delicious." Eleanor's spectral hand reached out, not to help, but to push Elara further into the abyss, attempting to drive her to the same fate as previous owners, to become another victim in the chair's endless cycle of torment. But then, a new, even more terrifying revelation struck Elara, a truth that shattered her perception of everything. The original tragedy, Lily May's death, wasn't an accident, nor was it solely the act of the family member. Elara herself, as a child, had been present. A suppressed memory, buried deep beneath layers of trauma and guilt, resurfaced with brutal clarity. She hadn't directly caused Lily May's death, but her childish actions, a moment of innocent carelessness, had inadvertently contributed to the tragic event. Perhaps she had left the window open, or distracted the adult who was meant to be watching Lily May. Her grief for her mother, her profound sense of loss, had inadvertently reawakened the chair's malevolence, making her the perfect vessel for its hunger. She wasn't just a victim. She was an unwitting participant, a link in the chain of terror, forever bound to the chair's dark history. The horror was no longer external. It was deeply personal, woven into the fabric of her own past, inescapable. The line between reality and hallucination had not just blurred, it had vanished, leaving Elara adrift in a sea of her own making, a prisoner of the chair and her own complicity. Chapter 6: The Confrontation and the Choice. The horrifying truth of her own unwitting complicity in Lily May's tragedy and the chair's insidious manipulation had ripped through Elara's fractured mind, leaving her raw and exposed. There was no escape, no denial left. The ghost was not an external entity to be banished, but a reflection of her deepest fears and guilt, amplified and twisted by the sentient malevolence of the rocking chair itself. This was not a battle against a spirit, but a desperate fight for her very soul. Armed with this agonizing revelation, Elara knew she had to confront the entity, not with salt and prayers, but with a battle of wills. She returned to the living room, the air thick with an oppressive chill, the rocking chair swaying with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if awaiting her. Its dark wood seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, and the faded crimson velvet of its seat appeared to deepen, almost to the color of dried blood. Elara stood before it, her body trembling, but her gaze fixed, a flicker of defiance in her haunted eyes. "What do you want?" she rasped, her voice hoarse from disuse and fear. The chair's rocking intensified, and a cacophony of whispers filled the room, a chorus of accusations and pleas, all echoing her own internal torment. Lily May's voice, distorted and childlike, accused her of neglect. Her mother's voice, laced with disappointment, spoke of failures. Eleanor's voice, a cold, venomous hiss, promised eternal torment. The entity, now fully revealed in its purpose and connection to Elara, lashed out. A sudden, invisible force slammed into her, sending her sprawling. The house groaned, timbers splintering, glass shattering in the windows. The walls seemed to buckle inward, the ceiling cracking, dust and debris raining down. The ghost's power manifested physically, tearing the house apart around them, forcing Elara to make her choice amidst literal destruction. This was not just a psychological battle. It was a physical manifestation of the chair's rage, a desperate attempt to break her completely. As Elara struggled to rise, the entity attempted to possess her. A cold, invasive presence surged into her mind, a torrent of foreign thoughts and memories, overwhelming her own. She felt her consciousness being pushed aside, her body no longer her own. It was a terrifying, intimate violation, a fight for control of her very being. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from her throat, fighting against the invading force. She saw flashes of Lily May's final moments, not as a vision, but as if she was Lily May, experiencing the terror, the fall, the agonizing silence. Then, she saw through the eyes of the family member who had sat in the chair, the cold indifference, the chilling satisfaction. The chair was trying to make her relive it, to become both victim and perpetrator, to fully embrace the cycle of grief and malevolence. Just as she felt herself slipping, a desperate, almost forgotten image flashed in her mind. Sarah, her pragmatic, loyal friend who had tried to help, who had been dismissed, who had been injured by the chair's unseen force. The thought of Sarah, of her kindness and unwavering belief in Ilara, even when Ilara herself had doubted, ignited a spark of defiance. She wouldn't let this entity claim her, not after what it had done to those she cared about. She wouldn't let it win. "No!" Ilara screamed, a primal roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. She pushed back against the invading presence, summoning every ounce of her shattered will. This was her choice: succumb to the haunting and her grief, or find the strength to break the cycle. It was tied to her ability to forgive herself for her unwitting complicity, to accept the past, and to release the ghost from its torment, and in doing so, release herself. But Ilara's choice to break the cycle didn't banish the entity. Instead of disappearing, the ghost, with a final, agonizing shriek that tore through the collapsing house, merged with Ilara. A searing pain, like 1,000 needles, shot through her body, followed by an unsettling calm. She felt a profound shift within her, a new presence, cold and ancient, settling into the deepest recesses of her mind. She had access to its knowledge, its power, but at the cost of her complete sanity. She was no longer just Ilara. She was a new, unsettling guardian of the chair, a medium through which the chair's influence could spread. The horror was not truly defeated. It had merely changed form, becoming an intrinsic part of her, a chilling testament to the fact that some battles, once joined, can never truly be won, only transformed. Chapter 7. The Aftermath and the Lingering Shadow. The house, once a battleground, now stood in an eerie, unsettling silence. The physical destruction from the confrontation in Chapter 6 was stark. Splintered wood, shattered glass, and gaping holes in the walls where the entity's power had manifested. But the internal wreckage within Ilara was far more profound. She had survived, yes, but the victory felt hollow, tainted. The immediate haunting had subsided, the violent rocking and chilling whispers replaced by a pervasive, heavy quiet. Yet the psychological scars remained, deep and raw, a constant throb beneath the surface of her consciousness. She began the arduous process of healing, or rather, existing. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of trying to piece together the fragments of her life. The house, despite its damage, was still her home, a silent witness to her ordeal. The rocking chair, miraculously intact amidst the chaos, sat in the living room, now perfectly still. Its dark wood no longer pulsed with malevolence, its crimson velvet no longer seemed to deepen with unseen energies. It was just an old chair, a piece of furniture, or was it? Sometimes, when the light hit it just right, or when the wind sighed through the broken windows, Ilara would catch a faint, unsettling aura emanating from it, a subtle chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She hadn't disposed of it. She couldn't. It was a morbid reminder, a trophy of her survival, or perhaps a constant, unsettling tether to the entity that now resided within her. The lingering question was a constant companion. Was it truly a ghost, or was it a manifestation of her own mind? The line between the supernatural and the psychological had not just blurred. It had dissolved completely. The true story aspect of her experience was reinforced here, as the ambiguity of such encounters is often a hallmark of real-life paranormal accounts. She found herself constantly replaying the events, searching for a rational explanation, a logical thread to pull, but always coming up empty. The entities merging with her had left her with a profound, unsettling knowledge, a sense of interconnectedness with the chair's dark history. But it had also stolen a part of her sanity, leaving her with a persistent, low-grade hum of paranoia. Alara experienced recurring nightmares, vivid and terrifying, that made her question if the entity was truly banished or merely dormant. In these dreams, the house was always collapsing, the rocking chair always at the center, and the whispers were back, not just from the chair, but from within her own mind, echoing her deepest fears and guilt. Sometimes she would wake to brief, unsettling hallucinations, a fleeting shadow in her peripheral vision, the faint scent of decay, or the sound of a child's distant sob. These were not as aggressive as the previous manifestations, but they were enough to keep her on edge, a constant reminder that her ordeal was far from over. If a supportive character had died in Chapter 6, Alara was haunted by their ghost, or by the crushing guilt of their death, blurring the lines between grief and continued supernatural influence. She would see Sarah in the corner of her eye, a pale, accusing figure, or hear her voice, whispering her name, only to turn and find nothing. The rocking chair, even if she had managed to dispose of it, reappeared in her dreams, or in unexpected places in her waking life. A fleeting glimpse in a shop window, a sudden appearance in a forgotten corner of her mind, a constant, inescapable reminder of her ordeal. The psychological horror persisted, a silent, insidious presence that had taken root deep within her, ensuring that even in the quietest moments, the ghost in the rocking chair continued to rock forever. Chapter 8. The Echo and the Legacy. Years had passed since the house had collapsed, since the entity had merged with Alara, since the world had irrevocably shifted on its axis. The physical scars on the land had healed. A new, modern house now stood where the old Victorian once did, a testament to resilience, or perhaps denial. Alara, now in her late 30s, had found a measure of peace, a fragile equilibrium in the aftermath of the storm. She had processed her grief, or at least learned to live with its constant, dull ache. She had even found a way to channel her experiences, becoming a grief counselor, helping others navigate the labyrinthine corridors of loss. Her unique perspective offering a strange, unsettling comfort. She had kept the rocking chair. It sat in her study, a quiet, unassuming piece of furniture in a room filled with books and the gentle hum of her laptop. Its dark wood was still polished, its crimson velvet still faded, but it no longer rocked on its own. Or did it? Sometimes, when she was deep in thought, or when the house was particularly quiet, she would catch a faint, almost imperceptible sway, a subtle creak that was easily dismissed as the settling of old wood or the play of shadows. She had learned to live with the ambiguity, to accept that some questions had no answers, that some horrors lingered not as overt threats, but as a quiet, unsettling presence. One crisp autumn afternoon, a new client arrived, a young woman named Clara, her eyes wide with a familiar, haunted look. Clara spoke of a recent, profound loss, of a beloved grandmother, and of an antique rocking chair inherited from her. As Clara described the subtle movements, the faint whispers, a growing sense of unease in her new, isolated home, Elara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. It was a cyclical warning, a chilling echo of her own past. She offered Clara a knowing glance, a cryptic warning about the insidious nature of grief, about the way it could open doors to things unseen, things that fed on sorrow. She spoke of the importance of confronting one's demons, of finding strength in vulnerability, her words laced with a double meaning that only she, and perhaps the rocking chair, truly understood. The cycle of haunting and trauma continued, perhaps even through generations, a silent, relentless current beneath the surface of everyday life. But the true horror, the final unexpected twist, was yet to be revealed. The narrative, presented as a true story, was not Elara's at all. It was a fictionalized account, a meticulously crafted tale written by the ghost itself, using Elara as a vessel. The rocking chair in Elara's study, seemingly dormant, was not just a piece of furniture. It was the pen, and Elara, the grief counselor, the survivor, was merely the ink. Her experiences, her pain, her very essence, being siphoned and shaped into a terrifying narrative. The final scene shows Elara, hunched over her laptop, typing furiously, her eyes glazed over, a faint, unsettling smile playing on her lips. The rocking chair in her study, now subtly rocking on its own, its rhythmic creak a silent, triumphant cadence, implies that she never truly escaped the haunting. She didn't learn to live with it. She became a part of it. The true story was still unfolding, and the horror was far from over, for the ghost had found its perfect author, forever bound to tell its terrifying tale, drawing new victims into its web with every word penned, every story shared, every life touched by the chilling legacy of the ghost in the rocking chair.